press corps. Kept thinking, okay, there's got to be something else. There must have been something up the hand of Davutoglu, because he's developed such a really impressive record internationally. And when it just died and stalled, I think there was, on the U.S. side, maybe a little feeling of the Turks had gotten ahead of themselves, and then this there wasn't much coherence to what they were pushing. And when the whole thing just stalled, you got the sense that there was a little, at least from the U.S. and the European side, the Turks had been put back in their place. Syria, as I was saying, has been a really interesting issue to follow over the last, going back into the Bush administration. I know when the Syrians, the Turks really took the lead on pushing for peace talks between the Syrians, there were a lot of sense on this side why the U.S. didn't get in and vigorously support it, which they didn't. And, you talked to both the Turks and the Syrians, and they really said that there was a lot of prospects for advancement going into right before the Gaza war. I mean, I interviewed President Assad earlier this year, and he said, he was committed to it, and then it all fell apart. And I think a lot of people blamed, the Israelis obviously, but also the Bush administration for not supporting it. But moving into the last couple of years, you're in Syria, and the amount of influence the Turks have, the trade, it's much more dominant than what the Iranians or the Arabs are doing. I mean, Assad, up until this latest unrest, was really trying to model himself after what Erdogan has done in his country. And I do think that Syria might be the one issue with the U.S. which will kind of heal some of these rifts over the last couple of years. But at the same time, you also felt that, at least from watching the diplomacy, that from the U.S. side there was a feeling too that the Syrians, the Turks had kind of gotten ahead of themselves on the Syrian question. And then when there were the negotiations to put together a government in Lebanon, the sense from the Turkish side was that things like the murder of Hariri, or the power equation inside Lebanon, it didn't really matter. I can remember talking to Ali Babachan a few months ago when he seemed to be diminishing the importance of the tribunal. It seemed like the nature of the regime in Syria didn't really matter. It was we get through this. You just trust us, and then to see what's happened in Syria and the fact that clearly the nature of that regime did matter, and now the Turks are having to recalibrate, and I think it is optimistic that it does seem like the U.S. and the Turks are on this side. And I'm sure the Turkey side would say, well, it's because of all these investments and time that we made in Syria that we now have this influence, which you don't, that it could kind of hold the day as things go forward. I think looking ahead, the Arab-Israeli front is going to be, to me, it's going to be going into the UN vote in September could really be telling as far as how the U.S.-Turkish relationship moves a lot because of how important Israel is in the Congress. I've been heartened over recent days when it looks like, whether it was the issue of the flotilla or just I guess Prime Minister Netanyahu sent a letter to Erdogan, it looks like both sides are trying to bury the hatchet and move forward. But I think a lot of what is how the relationship will rest on how the Turks play this and what the fallout is from that. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think may I ask the first question before I open it up to the audience, and I'd like to bring you to the Western side, the European side of this a little bit. And that is, when I saw during the campaign, the EU issue, as far as I can tell, did not play much of a role. The Prime Minister did not talk about it very much. Some of the reporting I've seen since has indicated that the EU accession is sort of looked at as perhaps yesterday's issue. And that to some extent the Turks are feeling their oaths and feel that look at the problems in Europe, especially in Greece, why do we want to be part of this? So I'd like to ask you all about that a little bit, how that plays into the U.S. relationship given our key role also in Europe. And also, now that Erdogan is strengthened, just look at Cyprus, why wouldn't he take the big move and open up the ports and see what happens? Is to kind of break the ice. Do you see that possibility coming? Maybe I can start with you.
Okay, the EU issue is not an issue anymore in Turkey, unfortunately. It is unfortunate because I'm one of those who have supported this publicly and put my neck out of Turkish-EU relationship. But it has fizzled out as the model partnership is. And it's both due to both Turkish side and losing heart in reforms, and also more to do with the some of the European countries at least, and some of the European leaders who wants to block the negotiations, whatever the costs are. So it links to Cyprus. There is no incentive in Turkey for Prime Minister Erdogan or anybody else to argue that we should do something on Cyprus. But for there is people are talking in Europe about this linkage between Turkey and EU going through Cyprus issue. I never believed that, and I still don't believe it. If we solve Cyprus problem today on the satisfaction, the total satisfaction of the Greek Cypriots, it doesn't make a bit difference in Turkish-EU relationship. So there is no incentive in Turkey. Why should Turkey move on Cyprus issue? And this was the sad attitude on the Greek Cypriot side for years. They never had an incentive. They never had felt pressure from Europe or United States to move on. Now, unfortunately, on the Turkish side, we are seeing the same thing. Any kind of pressure coming out of Europe doesn't cut any ice in Turkey anymore on any issues, including Cyprus. So I don't think Prime Minister Erdogan or foreign minister would just start working on Cyprus. They would much rather focus on relations with Israel and Armenia rather than looking at Cyprus, unless there is an unexplainable change in European attitudes. And U.S. comes there, I think. There is an argument always from the Europeans, especially from the French and sometimes from German, that the United States should not be involved in Turkish-EU relationship. I would argue otherwise. Even if they don't like it, they always listen and hear what the United States says about Turkish-EU relationship. The United States was at the forefront of this redemocratization and of Eastern Europe and widening the borders of Europe. It was, I think, a big project of the 21st century. It was, I could compare it with the Marshall Plan of the early 20th and mid-20th century. It was a big project, and it succeeded. But the project has not finished. If you look at the third stage of that project was to include Turkey into the wider Europe. And it has stopped there. And I think the United States should start putting more emphasis there on expanding the borders of Europe, which would also expand the borders of peace in Europe in general.
Maybe both Brian and Jay, as I mentioned at the beginning, Secretary Gates explicitly came out last year and blamed to some extent the Iranian position on the EU issue. So do you think the U.S. should become more vocal now and putting its position on EU membership for Turkey?